Captain Jake Morrison stared at the message on his screen and felt his hands shake with anger. The words were clear, but they made no sense to him. The Galactic Federation was ordering all human ships to pull back from the outer colonies. They were leaving 12 million people to die. Jake read the message again. Article 847 of the Corvani Code said the colonies were non-essential expansion zones. The Federation would not waste ships and soldiers defending them. The Vexari raiders were coming, and the humans living on those worlds would have to face them alone. This is crazy, Jake said to his first officer, Ryan Phillips. Those are our people out there. Ryan nodded, his face dark with worry. The code is the code, Captain. The Federation has followed these rules for 3,000 years. Jake turned away from the screen and looked out at the stars. His ship, the New Horizon, was one of the fastest in the human fleet. He could reach the colonies in 2 days if he pushed the engines hard, but his orders were clear. Turn around, go home, let the people die. On the other side of the galaxy, Lisa Carter sat in a big meeting room on Zentaris Prime, the capital world of the Federation. Around her sat aliens from dozens of different worlds. They all looked very different from each other, but they all had one thing in common. They believed the Corvani Code was perfect. The human request is denied, said Magistrate Thelvar. He was a tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms. His people, the Corvani, had written the code long ago. The colonies do not meet the population requirements for defense. We cannot waste resources on emotional attachments. Lisa stood up, her heart pounding. These are not emotional attachments. These are human lives. 12 million people who trusted the Federation to protect them. A snake-like alien called Kixmoth laughed. Your species is young, human, you do not understand. The code has kept peace in the galaxy for thousands of years. We cannot change it for you. But people are going to die, Lisa said. People die all the time, Thelvar replied. The code ensures that the greatest number live. This is how civilization works. Lisa looked around the room. Every alien face showed the same thing. They would not help. The code said no, so the answer was no. It did not matter how many humans would die. Back on his ship, Jake called his crew together. They stood in the main meeting room, 25 men and women who had served with him for 5 years. They had explored new worlds together. They had saved lives together. Now they were being asked to run away while their own people died. You all heard the orders, Jake said. We're supposed to head back to Earth, leave the colonies to the Vexari. His engineer, Megan Torres, spoke first. Captain, my sister lives on New Texas. She has 3 kids. My brother is on Harmony Station, said Lieutenant Ben Harper. He moved there last year to start a farm. Jake looked at each of his crew members. He saw the same thing in every face. They did not want to abandon their people. But they were soldiers, they followed orders. The Federation has rules, Jake said slowly. The Corvani Code is supposed to be perfect. It has kept peace for 3,000 years. Has it really? Megan asked. Or has it just kept the strong in power and the weak afraid to fight back? Jake thought about that. The code had many rules. Rules about who could trade with whom. Rules about which worlds could be settled. Rules about how wars should be fought. Rules about everything. And who had made these rules? The same aliens who now sat safely on their homeworlds while humans died. Sir, Ryan said quietly. What are your orders? Jake walked to the window and looked out at space. In the distance, he could see other human ships. They were all turning, around heading back to Earth, following orders, obeying the code. But Jake thought about something his grandfather had told him long ago. His grandfather had been a soldier too, back on Earth before humanity joined the Federation. Son, the old man had said, there comes a time when a good man has to choose between following orders and doing what's right. When that time comes, you'll know what to do. Jake turned back to his crew. The code says we can't help those colonies. The Federation says they're not worth saving. But I've been thinking about something. Who made us part of the Federation? Who agreed to follow? The code? We did, Megan said. Humanity voted to join 57 years ago. Right. We chose to join, which means we can choose what that membership means. Jake smiled for the first time since reading the orders. The code says the Federation won't help those colonies, but it doesn't say we can't. Ben Harper grinned. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Captain? I'm not suggesting anything, Jake said. I'm stating a fact. Those are our people out there, and humans don't abandon their own. Ryan stepped forward. Sir, if we disobey these orders, we'll be in big trouble. The Federation might kick humanity out entirely. Maybe, Jake said, but maybe it's time the galaxy learned something about humans. We don't just follow rules because someone tells us to. We follow rules that make sense, and a rule that lets 12 million people die doesn't make sense to me. He walked to the ship's communication system. This is Captain Morrison. To all human vessels in the area, I know we've been ordered to withdraw. I know the code says we can't help the outer colonies, but I also know that those are our people out there, and humans don't run when their people are in danger. Jake took a deep breath. I'm taking the New Horizon to defend the colonies. Any ship that wants to join me is welcome. Any ship that wants to follow Federation orders can head home. No shame either way. But I'm not leaving 12 million people to die just because some ancient rule says they're not worth saving. One by one, the human ships in the area began to change course. They turned away from Earth and toward the colonies, toward danger, toward a fight they might not win. The aliens in the Federation had spent 3,000 years following the code. They thought it was perfect. They thought it could never be changed. They were about to learn that humans had different ideas about perfection. The warning sirens on New Texas began wailing at dawn. Kate Johnson was drinking coffee on her front porch when she saw the first Vexari ships drop out of the sky like angry metal birds. She set down her cup and ran inside to get her rifle. Mom, what's happening? Asked her 10-year-old son Danny. The bad guys are here, Kate said, checking her weapon. But don't worry, the good guys are coming too. Across the galaxy, Federation monitoring stations recorded the attack with cold efficiency. The Vexari had brought 50 ships and 10,000 soldiers. New Texas had maybe 200 fighters and some mining equipment. According to the code, this was not a battle, it was an execution. Commander Ryan Phillips stood in the command center of New Texas and watched the enemy ships land. He had been visiting the colony when the attack began. Now he was trapped here with everyone else. Sir, we're getting reports from all over the colony, said Sergeant Lisa Morgan. The Vexari are landing in 6 different places. They're moving, fast. Ryan looked at the tactical display. The enemy was doing exactly what the Federation military manual said they would do. They were following proper invasion protocols, landing in strategic locations, setting up communication jammers, moving with precision and discipline. How long until Captain Morrison gets here? Ryan asked. 3 hours, if he's lucky, Lisa replied. Ryan nodded. 3 hours was a long time when people were shooting at you, but he had learned something important during his years in the human military. Sometimes you didn't need to win. Sometimes you just needed to not lose until help arrived. All right, people. The Vexari think they know how this fight will go. They've read the same manuals we have. They expect us to set up defensive positions and wait for them to overrun us. So we're going to do something different. In the mining complex outside New Texas City, engineer Megan Torres was turning cargo haulers into weapons of war. She had arrived on the colony 3 days ago to inspect the mining equipment. Now she was using that same equipment to build things that had never existed before. This is crazy, said Pete Wilson, the mine foreman. You can't put military shields on a cargo hauler. The power requirements alone will fry the whole system. Megan smiled as she welded another piece of armor plating to the side of the hauler. Pete, you've been mining asteroids for 15 years. You've taken these haulers into places that would kill most military ships. You really think we can't make them tougher? But the Federation safety regulations say, the Federation isn't. Here, Megan interrupted. We are, and we're going to save our people with whatever we have. She stepped back and looked at her work. The cargo hauler now looked like something from a nightmare. Thick armor covered its hull. Mining lasers had been converted into weapons. The whole thing should have fallen apart under its own weight. Instead, it started up with a rumble that shook the ground. The Vexari advance began exactly as their tactical computers predicted. Human defenders took positions behind buildings and in prepared foxholes. The aliens moved forward in perfect formation, their energy weapons cutting through human defenses like paper. Then something unexpected happened. A mining hauler came around the corner of a building, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Its converted mining laser opened fire, cutting through Vexari armor like it was made of cardboard. The aliens scattered, their perfect formation broken. "What in the seven hells is that thing?" demanded Vexari war leader Krexdan. His intelligence officer checked the scanners. "Unknown, sir. It appears to be a mining vessel, but the energy readings are impossible. No mining ship should be able to generate that kind of power." "Destroy it," Krexdan ordered. 3 Vexari fighters swooped down to attack the hauler. They fired their weapons according to standard protocols, aiming for the engine compartment and control systems. The hauler ignored the damage and kept fighting. The Vexari had never seen anything like it. In 3,000 years of following the code, every species fought the same way. Ships had specific designs for specific purposes. Military vessels looked like military vessels. Cargo ships looked like cargo ships. You could tell what something was just by looking at it. But these humans had taken cargo ships and somehow made them into warships. They had turned mining equipment into weapons. They were fighting with tools that should not work, using tactics that violated every rule of proper warfare. And somehow, they were winning. On the ground, Ryan Phillips led a team of colonists in an attack that no military manual had ever described. They came out of the sewers beneath the Vexari landing site, carrying weapons that ranged from military rifles to welding torches. "Remember," Ryan whispered as they moved through the tunnels, "the Vexari expect us to fight like soldiers, so we're going to fight like humans." They emerged behind the enemy lines and attacked with furious determination. The Vexari spun around, trying to respond to this new threat, but their training had not prepared them for enemies who ignored the proper rules of engagement. Human fighters used construction tools as weapons. They turned farming equipment into mobile fortresses. They coordinated their attacks through hand signals and shouted orders instead of using proper military communication protocols. The Vexari war leader watched his tactical display with growing confusion. His forces were losing ground to an enemy that should not exist. According to every military database in the Federation, these colonists should have been defeated in the first hour of fighting. Instead, they were pushing his troops back. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting more human ships approaching the system." Krexdan smiled. Finally, something that made sense. The Federation would send proper military vessels to restore order. Professional soldiers who followed the rules and fought like civilized beings. The human fleet that dropped out of hyperspace looked like nothing Krexdan had ever seen. There were cargo ships fitted with weapons that should not fit, passenger liners converted into troop transports, mining vessels that somehow carried military-grade shields. At the head of the fleet was a ship that looked almost normal. Almost like a proper military vessel. But even it had modifications that violated a dozen Federation safety regulations. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the New Horizon," came the transmission. "Vexari forces, you are attacking Federation citizens. Withdraw immediately." Krexdan opened a channel. "Human Captain, these colonies have been designated non-essential by the Federation Council. We are operating within the bounds of the Corvani Code." "I don't care about your code," Jake replied. "Those are our people down there, and humans protect their own." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. The human fleet fought with desperate creativity, using tactics that no computer could predict. They rammed enemy ships instead of engaging in proper long-range duels. They used cargo containers as missiles. They coordinated attacks through methods that Federation monitoring systems could not understand. But most importantly, they fought like they had something to lose. The Vexari retreated after 6 hours of fighting. Their war leader filed a report that would puzzle Federation analysts for months. How had a ragtag collection of colonists and converted cargo ships defeated a proper military force? On New Texas, Kate Johnson found her son playing in the wreckage of a Vexari fighter that had crashed in their backyard. "Mom, look what I found," Danny said, holding up a piece of alien technology. Kate smiled and hugged her son. "That's nice, honey. But next time the bad guys come, we'll be ready for them." Across the galaxy, news of the impossible victory spread through Federation communication networks. On every world, in every species, the same question was being asked. If the humans could ignore the code and win, what else might be possible? On the industrial world of Mechanis 7, Sam Rodriguez put down his welding torch and looked at the news report playing on the factory screens. The humans had won. They had actually beaten the Vexari using cargo ships and mining equipment. "Did you see that?" asked his friend Tony Martinez, pointing at the screen. "Those humans just ignored the Federation rules and saved their people." Sam nodded slowly. He had been working in the factories of Mechanis 7 for 12 years. Every day, he and 10,000 other workers built parts for Federation ships. Every day they followed the same rules, worked the same hours, and accepted the same low pay. The corporate trade guild said it was necessary. The code said workers must accept their place in society. But if humans could ignore the code and win, maybe workers could ignore it too. "Tony," Sam said quietly, "how long have we been asking for better safety equipment?" 3 years. The guild keeps saying it's not in the budget." Sam looked around the factory floor. Half the safety lights were broken. The air filters hadn't been changed in months. Last week, Maria Santos had lost 2 fingers in a machine that should have been fixed years ago. What if we stopped asking and started demanding? On Zentaris Prime, the emergency session of the Federation Council was not going well. Magistrate Thelvar paced back and forth in front of the great assembly hall, his forearms waving in agitation. "This is a disaster," he declared. "The humans have shown complete disregard for proper authority. They have violated dozens of articles in the Corvani Code." Minister Kixmoth coiled his snake-like body tighter around his speaking platform. "Worse, other species are starting to ask questions that should not be asked." The council chamber held representatives from 47 different worlds. For 3,000 years they had met here to discuss trade disputes and territorial agreements. The conversations were always polite, always formal, and always predictable. Today was different. "The humans saved 12 million lives," said Ambassador Veltar of the Hydrian water worlds. "Perhaps we should be congratulating them instead of condemning them." Thelvar's skin turned a darker shade of blue, which meant he was angry. "Ambassador Veltar, the code exists for the good of all species. If every race decides to ignore it whenever they feel emotional, we will have chaos." "Would chaos be worse than letting 12 million people die?" Veltar asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. For 3,000 years, no one had asked it. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison and diplomat Lisa Carter were doing something that shocked the Federation security staff. They were walking through the halls of the government building without permission, ignoring the guards who tried to stop them. "Sir, you cannot enter the council chambers without proper authorization," said Security Chief Dexmar. Jake smiled. "Watch me." He pushed open the doors and walked into the middle of the emergency session. Lisa followed close behind, carrying a data pad full of information that was about to change everything. "Honored delegates," Jake said in a loud voice that carried across the chamber. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the Corvani Code." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Aliens shouted in dozens of different languages. Security guards moved toward the humans, but Jake held up his hand. "Before you throw us out, you might want to hear what we discovered about your precious code." Thelvar's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You have no right to be here, human. You have already violated enough laws for one day." "Have I?" Jake asked. "Or have I just proved that some laws aren't worth following?" Lisa stepped forward and activated her data pad. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing star charts and historical records. "We did some research on the original Corvani civilization," she said. "Very interesting stuff. It turns out the code wasn't created to prevent wars or maintain peace. It was created to make sure no other species could ever become powerful enough to threaten Corvani control. The chamber fell silent. That's impossible, Thelvar said, but his voice sounded uncertain. The code is ancient wisdom. It has maintained galactic stability for millennia. Has it? Lisa asked. Or has it just maintained Corvani power? She changed the display to show population and technology statistics. According to these records, when the code was first implemented, the galaxy had over 200 spacefaring civilizations. Today there are 47. What happened to the other 153? Minister Kixmoth hissed softly. They were absorbed into existing civilizations. It was natural consolidation. Was it? Jake asked. Or were they prevented from growing strong enough to matter? The display changed again, showing trade routes and resource allocation charts. The code requires all major decisions to be approved by the Council. But who controls the Council? The same species that wrote the code. Every rule, every regulation, every wise decision just happens to benefit the same old powers. Across the galaxy, the effects of humanity's victory were spreading faster than the Federation could contain them. On Mechanus 7, Sam Rodriguez stood in front of the factory administration building with 5,000 other workers. We want better safety equipment, he called out to the guild administrator who had come out to face them. We want fair wages, and we want them now. The guild has procedures for addressing worker concerns, the administrator replied. You must file the proper forms and wait for committee review. We're done waiting, Sam said. We're done following procedures that lead nowhere. Give us what we're asking for, or we shut down production. You cannot do that. It violates the labor codes. Sam smiled. A few days ago, humans violated the military codes and saved 12 million lives. Today, we're violating the labor codes to save ourselves. On the Hydrian waterworld of Aquatica, Ambassador Veltar was having a very different conversation with her government. The Hydrians had always been restricted to water-covered planets. The code said it was for their own good. Water dwellers belonged in water. But Veltar had been thinking about the human victory. If humans could modify cargo ships to fight wars, maybe Hydrians could modify their ships to explore dry land. The idea is absurd, said Prime Swimming Council leader Blurix. We are aquatic beings. We cannot survive on dry worlds. Can't we? Veltar asked. Or have we just never tried because the code said we shouldn't? She showed him images from the human colonies. Humans lived underwater in specially designed habitats. They lived in space stations with artificial gravity. They lived on desert worlds and ice worlds and worlds with poisonous atmospheres. Humans, adapt, she said. Maybe it's time we learned to adapt too. Back on Zentaris Prime, the Federation Council was discovering that questions, once started, were very hard to stop. If the code is so perfect, asked the insectoid delegate from Hiveworld Zeta, why has technological progress slowed to almost nothing in the past 1,000 years? Why are trade routes so inefficient that cargo takes months to reach nearby? Systems? Demanded the representative from the mining worlds. Why does every attempt at reform get blocked by the same committee that has blocked reforms for centuries? Asked a dozen voices at once. Thelvar looked around the chamber and realized that something fundamental had changed. For 3,000 years, the question had always been, how do we maintain order? Now it was becoming, why do we need this kind of order? Jake Morrison stood in the center of the chaos and smiled. This was what humans did best. They asked the questions that others were afraid to ask. They challenged the rules that others accepted without thinking. The code isn't evil, he said when the chamber finally quieted down, but it's not perfect either. It was written by people who lived 3,000 years ago. Maybe it's time to ask whether their solutions still work for our problems. And if we abandon the code? Thelvar asked. What then? Chaos? War? The collapse of civilization? Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe we discover that beings who are free to make their own choices can solve problems better than beings who are forced to follow ancient rules. He looked around the chamber at dozens of alien faces. Some looked angry, some looked frightened. but many looked thoughtful. "The galaxy is changing," he said. "The question isn't whether we can stop that change. The question is whether we'll guide it or let it drag us along behind." Outside the council chambers, across dozens of worlds, millions of beings were asking themselves the same question that Sam Rodriguez had asked in his factory. What if we stopped asking and started demanding? The answer would reshape the galaxy. Admiral Kate Wells stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Liberty, and watched the largest fleet in galactic history approach Earth. 2,000 ships in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the authority of 3,000 years of our unquestioned power. "They sure know how to make an entrance," said her tactical officer, Lieutenant Ben Harper. Kate nodded grimly. The Corvani Coalition had come to make an example of humanity. They wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that forgot their place. The message was simple: obey the code or face destruction. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition fleet." "Put it through." The main screen filled with the image of Magistrate Thelvar. Behind him stood representatives from 20 different species, all united in their determination to preserve the old order. "Admiral Wells," Thelvar began, "you command what appears to be a military force composed largely of civilian vessels. This violates 17 different articles of the Corvani Code." Kate smiled. "Nice to see you too, Magistrate. You're looking well for someone who's about to lose a war." Thelvar's blue skin darkened with anger. "You misunderstand the situation, human. We offer you one final chance to surrender. Return to Earth. Disband your illegal fleet. Accept Federation. Oversight of all human military activities. And if we refuse, then we will demonstrate why the Code has maintained peace for 3 millennia. Your world will serve as an object lesson to other species who might consider following your example." Kate looked around her bridge. Her crew was young, most of them barely out of training. Her ship was a converted cargo hauler that shouldn't have been able to carry the weapons it now mounted. Her fleet was a collection of mining vessels, passenger liners, and freight haulers that had been transformed into warships through human ingenuity and desperation. According to every military manual in the galaxy, she should surrender immediately. "Magistrate," she said, "you've been following the same playbook for 3,000 years. Maybe it's time you learned that humans write their own rules." She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "All ships, this is Admiral Wells. You know what we're fighting for, not just Earth, but the right of every being in the galaxy to determine their own destiny. The Coalition thinks overwhelming force will make us surrender. Let's show them what humans do when someone tries to overwhelm us." The Coalition fleet attacked with textbook precision. Ships moved in perfect formations, their weapons firing in coordinated patterns that had been refined over millennia. It was beautiful in its efficiency, terrifying in its power, and completely useless against an enemy that refused to fight by the same rules. The human fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane, individual ships moving in patterns that Coalition computers couldn't predict. A converted mining ship suddenly accelerated directly toward a Coalition battleship, its crude weapons blazing. The Coalition captain tried to respond according to proper military doctrine, but the human ship was already past his weapons and ramming his hull. "What are they doing?" demanded Coalition war leader Zexkar. "No military force would sacrifice ships in random attacks." His tactical officer studied the display in confusion. "Sir, I don't think these are random attacks, but I can't determine their strategy." The truth was simpler than the Coalition could understand. The humans weren't following a strategy. They were following an idea: protect Earth at any cost. Captain Ryan Phillips commanded a squadron of converted passenger liners that had been turned into assault ships. His mission was impossible according to military theory. His ships were too slow, too lightly armed, and too poorly armored to engage proper warships. He attacked anyway. "All ships follow my lead," he called out as his squadron dove toward a Coalition cruiser. "Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to save our world." The passenger liners swarmed around the cruiser like angry insects. Their improvised weapons couldn't penetrate the alien ship's shields, but they didn't need to. Instead, they used their cargo bays to launch modified shipping containers filled with explosives. The Coalition captain had never seen anything like it. "They're using cargo containers as missiles," he reported in disbelief. "This violates every principle of space combat." His ship shuddered as the improvised weapons impacted against his hull. The explosions weren't powerful enough to destroy his vessel, but they damaged his sensors and disrupted his weapon systems. While he was distracted, 3 more human ships attacked from different angles, their mining lasers cutting through his armor plating. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out again and again. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Crews that should have surrendered kept attacking. The Coalition found themselves fighting an enemy that ignored the rules of warfare so completely that their own tactical computers couldn't process what was happening. On Earth, the planetary defense coordinator was a woman named Ellen Hayes. She had been an engineer before the war, designing better farming equipment for the outer colonies. Now she was coordinating the defense of humanity's homeworld using principles she had learned from fixing broken tractors. "The orbital platforms are taking heavy damage," reported her aide, Captain Steve Parker. Ellen nodded. The platforms had been built according to Federation specifications designed to withstand attacks from conventional fleets. They were failing against the Coalition's overwhelming firepower. "Shut them down," she ordered. "Ma'am?" "Shut down the orbital platforms. All of them." Steve looked confused. "But without the platforms, Earth's defenses will be different," Ellen finished. "The Coalition knows how to fight orbital platforms. They've been doing it for 3,000 years. But they don't know how to fight what comes next." 20 minutes later, the Coalition fleet found themselves facing something unprecedented. Instead of fixed defensive positions, Earth was protected by thousands of small, fast-moving objects. Satellites had been converted into guided missiles. Communication relays had been turned into weapons platforms. Even weather monitoring stations were attacking with improvised armaments. "This is chaos," Thelvar said, watching his perfect battle plan fall apart. "How can they coordinate so many individual units without a central command structure?" His intelligence officer had no answer. The humans seemed to be using some kind of communication system that didn't rely on the standard Federation protocols. Orders were passed through personal communicators, hand signals, and sometimes just shared understanding. It should have been impossible. It was impossible. But it was working. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Harper led a boarding party onto a captured Coalition battleship. His team consisted of miners, farmers, engineers, and shop teachers who had volunteered to fight for their world. They carried weapons that ranged from military rifles to welding torches to farming tools. "Remember," Ben told his team as they cut through the ship's hull, "these aliens have been fighting the same way for 3,000 years. They expect us to follow the same rules. So we're going to do everything differently." The Coalition crew fought bravely, but they had been trained to repel boarders who advanced through corridors in organized formations. Ben's team came through the ventilation system, the cargo bays, and the maintenance shafts. They attacked from 6 different directions at once, using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. Within an hour, the Coalition battleship was under human control. As the battle raged on, something unexpected began to happen. Ships in the Coalition fleet started breaking formation. Alien crews who had spent their lives following orders began asking questions they had never asked before. "Why are we fighting these humans?" asked Sub-Commander Veldak of the Hydrian Water Fleet. "They defended their colonies. They protected their people. If someone attacked our worlds, wouldn't we do the same?" His captain had no good answer. On a Chitauri hive ship, individual drones began expressing thoughts that violated their species' collective consciousness. "The humans fight as individuals, but they work together better than we do. How is this possible?" Across the Coalition fleet, the same question was being asked in dozens of different languages. What if the humans are right? The answer came slowly, one ship at a time. Coalition vessels began withdrawing from the battle, not in surrender, but in refusal to continue fighting for a cause they no longer believed in. Admiral Kate Wells watched the enemy fleet break apart and felt something she hadn't expected. Sadness. These weren't evil beings. They were just beings who had been told what to think for so long that they had forgotten how to think for themselves. Admiral, Ben Harper called from the captured battleship, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 coalition vessels. What are your orders? Kate thought about the choice in front of her. She could destroy the surrendering ships and prove that humans were as ruthless as their enemies claimed. Or she could do something that the galaxy hadn't seen in 3,000 years. Accept their surrenders, she ordered. Treat the prisoners with respect. Show them that there's a difference between winning a battle and being right. The Battle of Earth ended not with the destruction of the Coalition fleet, but with its transformation. Ships that had come to restore the old order found themselves questioning why that order needed to exist at all. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Fleet Admiral Jake Morrison stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly. The Great Hall on Zentaris Prime looked the same as it always had, but everything else had changed. Where once sat representatives, who spoke only when permitted, now stood beings from dozens of worlds who had come to build something new. The old Federation is gone, Jake said to the assembled delegates. We didn't destroy it with weapons. We destroyed it with questions. Questions like, why should ancient rules matter more than living beings? Why should fear of change be stronger than hope for the future? In the audience, former Magistrate Thelvar listened with an expression that was hard to read. His own people had removed him from power after the failed war against humanity. Now he sat among the other delegates, no longer a ruler, but simply another voice in the discussion. Jake continued, we're here to write new rules, not rules that control, but rules that protect, not rules that divide, but rules that unite. The first rule is simple. Every being has the right to choose their own path. Ambassador Lisa Carter stepped forward carrying a simple document. Not the massive, complex Corvani code with its thousands of articles and subclauses, but a single page written in clear, simple language that any species could understand. The Charter of Free Worlds, she announced. It guarantees the right of every species to govern themselves, to trade freely, to explore new worlds, and to defend their people. It forbids any being or government from imposing their will on others. The Hydrian delegate, Ambassador Veltar, raised a tentacle. And if someone violates these rights, what then? Then we stop them, Jake said simply. Not because ancient rules tell us to, but because protecting freedom is something worth fighting for. On Mechanis 7, Sam Rodriguez walked through the new factory that had been built to replace the old one. The workers had gotten everything they asked for, better safety equipment, fair wages, and the right to organize their own schedules. Production had actually increased, something the corporate trade guild said was impossible. Turns out people work harder when they're treated like people instead of machines, Sam told the visiting Federation inspector. Who would have thought? The inspector, a nervous Corvani bureaucrat named Peckstar, checked his datapad. This violates 17 different labor efficiency protocols. Yeah, Sam said with a grin. Isn't it great? Across the galaxy, similar changes were happening on world after world. The Hydrians had begun exploring dry land, building amazing underwater cities on previously forbidden worlds. The Chithari had discovered that individual creativity actually made their hive mind stronger, not weaker. Even the proud Corvani were learning that adapting to change was more useful than resisting it. But the most important changes were happening in the minds of ordinary beings who had spent their lives accepting limits that no longer made sense. On the water world of Aquatica, young Hydrians were building submarines that could travel through space. On the hive world of Chitauri Prime, individual artists were creating beauty that had never existed before. On dozens of worlds, children were growing up with a new idea, that the universe was full of possibilities, not restrictions. President Ellen Hayes of Earth signed the Terra Accords in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. The document established humanity's role not as conquerors or rulers, but as the species that had reminded everyone else what freedom meant. We didn't set out to change the galaxy, she said in her speech. We just refused to let our people die, because someone else's rules said they weren't worth saving. Turns out that was enough. In the audience sat representatives from over 100 worlds, including many that had been absorbed into larger civilizations under the old code. They had reclaimed their independence and were building new societies, based on cooperation rather than domination. But not everyone was happy with the changes. On the fortress world of Hegemony Prime, war leader Craxton met with other military commanders who refused to accept the new order. They commanded fleets loyal to the old ways, species who believed that strength should rule over weakness. The humans have infected the galaxy with their chaos, Craxton declared. Order must be restored. His allies nodded in agreement. They represented civilizations that had thrived under the code, species that had used the rules to maintain their power over others. The new charter threatened everything they had built. "We have allies," said Fleet Commander Zultar of the Nexus, Empire. "Species that remember the value of order. The humans may have won one battle, but the war for civilization is far from over." But even as they planned their resistance, the old guard found their support slipping away. Young members of their own species were asking the same dangerous questions that had spread across the galaxy. Why follow leaders who ruled through fear? Why accept that some beings were born to command while others were born to obey? On the trading, World of Commerce station, engineer Megan Torres opened a shipyard that built vessels according to a radical new principle: function over form. Instead of designing ships to meet Federation specifications, her teams built craft designed to solve specific problems. "This mining ship needs to work in asteroid fields with high radiation," a customer explained. "The old designs don't work. Then we'll build something new," Megan replied. The ship that emerged from her shipyard looked like nothing in any Federation database. It was ugly, unconventional, and completely effective. Word spread quickly, and soon Megan had orders from dozens of worlds. "The Federation always said there was only one right way to build a ship," she told her assistant Tony Martinez. "Turns out there are as many right ways as there are problems to solve." The ripple effects continued to spread. Trade routes that had remained unchanged for centuries were suddenly replaced by more efficient paths designed by human economists. Scientific research accelerated as species began sharing information freely instead of hoarding it according to ancient restrictions. But perhaps the most important change was in the children. On New Texas, the colony that had sparked the revolution, 10-year-old Danny Johnson attended a school unlike any that had existed under the old Federation. His classmates included young Hydrians learning to breathe air, Chitauri drones developing individual personalities, and even a few young Corvani who had chosen to live among other species. "Today we're going to learn about engineering," said his teacher, a retired human military officer named Ben Harper. "Who can tell me the most important rule of engineering?" A young Hydrian raised her fin. "There are no rules, only problems to solve." "That's right," Ben said with a smile. "The universe doesn't care about our rules. It only cares about what works." On Zentaris Prime, the Galactic Assembly continued its work of building a new form of government. Progress was slow and sometimes frustrating. Different species had different ideas about freedom, different concepts of justice, different dreams for the future. But they were talking. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy's representatives were having real discussions instead of reciting ancient formulas. "The humans have given us something precious," said Veltar during one particularly difficult debate about trade regulations. "They've given us the right to disagree." Former Magistrate Thelvar, who had spent months learning to think for himself instead of simply enforcing old rules, nodded slowly. "Disagreement is uncomfortable," he admitted, "but it's also how new ideas are born." Jake Morrison, now serving as Earth's primary representative to the Assembly, watched the debates with satisfaction. They weren't always polite. They weren't always efficient, but they were real. "Admiral," Lisa Carter said during a break in the proceedings, "do you think this will actually work? Can beings who have been following rules for 3,000 years really learn to make their own choices?" Jake looked out the window at the bustling streets of Zentaris Prime. Young aliens from dozens of species walked together, talking and laughing, and arguing about ideas that would have been forbidden under the old code. "I think they already are," he said. The galaxy was changing, one choice at a time, not because anyone forced it to change, but because beings across the stars had discovered something wonderful. They had the power to choose their own destiny. The old rules had promised peace through order. The new rules promised something better: peace through freedom, And on 1,000 worlds in a million different ways, the children of the galaxy were learning the most important lesson humanity had to teach, that the only limits that really matter are the ones you accept. The stars themselves seemed brighter in a universe where any being could look up and say, "I wonder what's possible," and then set out to discover the answer. The humans hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it, and that made all the difference.